All right, buckle up for this one because we've got a fascinating deep dive for you today.
Yeah, this is a unique one.
We're looking into the work of Oliver Whitwer, and let me tell you, this guy is something else.
He's definitely carved his own path.
He's developed what he calls empirical science. But I think it's safe to say it's not quite what we'd find in a typical science journal.
No, not at all.
And that's what makes this so interesting.
Absolutely.
We've got blog posts, AI dialogues, even a draft academic paper, all from this guy who seems like he walked straight out of a Dan Brown novel, you know?
A little bit, yeah.
But here's the thing. He also has a physics background, a degree from ETH Zurich, no less. So it's like, wait a minute, is there something real here?
Right, that's what makes it so compelling.
So he's not just some random guy on the internet. We've got 27 years of his work to dig into.
27 years, that's a serious commitment.
It really is. And to top it off, he blends physics and spirituality in a way you don't often see. It's like he looked at the road less traveled and said, nah, I'm going off-roading.
Exactly, he's forging his own path.
So, to understand where he ends up, we've got to go back to the beginning. Your notes mention a physics degree, sometime in IT, all very normal so far, and then, bam, sharp turn into, well, this whole other thing he's created.
It's quite the trajectory.
It is. So what happened? What was the catalyst for this major shift?
Well, a pivotal point seems to be his time with the Bruno Groening movement.
Bruno Gruning. Now that name rings a bell.
Groening was a German faith healer, quite a following back in the mid-20th century, and Oliver was involved for a while.
Okay. Faith healing, that definitely piques the interest.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece of the puzzle.
But Oliver eventually moved on from the movement. Why was that? What wasn't clicking for him with Groening's teachings?
That's not explicitly stated in the materials you gave me, but reading between the lines, I think Oliver's scientific mind might have been looking for something more.
More structure.
Possibly. Or maybe a way to quantify, to understand the mechanisms behind spirituality, not just accept it on faith alone.
So he leaves the movement, but obviously the spiritual quest stays with him. You mentioned he's been at this for decades. What does that look like? Was he meditating in a cave all this time?
Not quite a cave. But you're right to highlight his dedication. From what I gathered, he approached this pursuit with the intensity of a kung fu master.
Wow, okay, serious dedication.
He's been exploring these ideas, writing about them on his blog, even attempting to formalize them in this academic paper. This isn't just dabbling, it's a life's work.
It's interesting, though, that he felt a need to go beyond just the subjective experience, right? Like, he wanted a system, a framework, something tangible to show for it.
Precisely. And that's where his story takes another interesting turn around 2017. Something clicks for him, and that's when he claims to have unlocked this deeper understanding of how our inner and outer world interact. And from that, well, he developed what he calls empirical science.
Okay, and that's where things start to get really interesting because he's using the language of science, but, as we'll see, his methods and conclusions, not so conventional. And to explain it all, he invents his own terminology, which, I'll be honest, can be a little intimidating.
A bit like trying to learn a whole new language, just to understand his ideas.
Right. We're talking mental space, elementals, even a creation formula. It's like he's built his own scientific language, and we're just trying to decipher it.
It is a lot to unpack, but that's where that draft academic paper you gave me becomes so helpful.
Oh, you mean the one that reads like it was written in a completely different universe?
Well, maybe not that different. But it does give us a glimpse into how he's trying to formalize these concepts, to create a system, a framework.
Okay, so let's try to break it down, starting with this mental space. I'll be honest, it sounds a little too woo-woo for me, even with the physics background. How does Oliver actually define it?
In simple terms, he describes mental space as the underlying fabric of reality.
Okay, that sounds even more abstract.
I know. But stick with me here. He's basically saying that mental space is where thoughts, emotions, beliefs, even the laws of physics,
Yeah.
they all intersect and influence each other.
So it's not just that our thoughts and emotions exist within this space, they're actually shaping it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like this dynamic field where everything is interconnected. He gives this example. Imagine your anxieties about a presentation could actually influence your computer.
Wait, what? Like make it crash at the worst possible moment?
That's a very simplified way of putting it, but yeah, that's the kind of idea he's getting at.
Okay, so we're not just talking about some abstract, feel-good interconnectedness here. He's saying there's a real, tangible impact.
Exactly. And it's within this mental space, this underlying fabric of reality, that we find what Oliver calls elementals.
All right, elementals. So we've gone from the matrix to, like, the periodic table of the mind. Break this one down for us. What are elementals?
Think of elementals as the fundamental building blocks of mental space. If atoms are the building blocks of matter, elementals are the building blocks of thoughts, feelings, beliefs.
So like the atoms of our inner world.
Exactly. And just like atoms combine to create the world we see around us, Oliver believes that elementals interact and combine to create our experiences.
Okay, I'm starting to see how his physics background comes into play here. He's drawing these parallels between the building blocks of the physical world and what he sees as the building blocks of our internal world.
And it gets even weirder or more interesting depending on how you look at it.
Oh, I have a feeling I know where this is going.
He believes that even words have the power to shape these elementals.
Wait, so the words we use, they don't just communicate ideas, they actually mold the fabric of this mental space.
That's the theory. He sees language as more than just a communication tool, but as a force that can actually influence this underlying reality.
Okay, now that's a bold claim. So choosing our words carefully isn't just about being polite or politically correct. It's about, like, shaping the very fabric of reality, at least according to Oliver.
That's his view, yeah. And it's here that we start to see both the potential implications of his ideas, but also where we need to tread carefully and really examine things critically.
Because if our thoughts and emotions, even our words, can have this tangible impact on the world around us, then what does that mean for our understanding of free will, of responsibility, of the nature of reality itself?
Those are exactly the kinds of questions Oliver's work forces us to consider.
This is a lot to process. So before we go there, let's back up a bit. How does Oliver even research these ideas? We're talking about mental space, elementals. This doesn't sound like any science experiment I've ever heard of.
You're right to point that out, because this is where Oliver makes a key distinction. He talks about empirical versus empirical research.
Okay, those sound very similar, but I'm guessing they're not.
Not quite. He says traditional science focuses on the empirical, the stuff we can observe and measure in the material world.
Which makes sense, right? That's what we usually think of as science.
Exactly. But Oliver argues that to really understand reality, we need empirical research too, exploring the inner world, our thoughts, emotions, and how they interact with the outside world.
So it's like, we can study the brain, but that's not the same as understanding the mind, the subjective experience.
Precisely. And here's where Oliver's methods take a turn from mainstream science. He relies heavily on personal experience, anecdotal evidence.
Wait, hold on. Anecdotal evidence, isn't that like the opposite of rigorous science?
In traditional science, absolutely. But Oliver also draws from the wisdom of mystics and spiritual traditions, things that don't fit neatly into a lab report.
Which I imagine raises some eyebrows in the scientific community.
For sure. It's
Yeah.
a valid critique, and one that Oliver actually acknowledges. He says the tools of traditional science, while great for studying the material world, aren't designed to explore consciousness and its potential effects on reality.
It's like trying to study a dream by analyzing the chemical composition of your pillow. You're missing the whole point.
Exactly. And this is where that trauma therapy anecdote you mentioned comes in. He uses it to bridge the gap between his empirical approach and actual observable results.
Remind me about that one.
Right, so he talks about how addressing an internal thing, like a traumatic memory, can lead to very real changes in a person's behavior, their relationships, even their physical health.
Which you could argue is empirical evidence, in a way. Like something measurable changed.
Exactly. It's a clever way for Oliver to connect his ideas to something that even skeptics can wrap their heads around, because we've all felt how our inner state can affect our outer reality.
Absolutely. But let's say, just for a moment, that there is something to Oliver's ideas. Where does all this lead? What's the end goal?
Well, he envisions a world transformed by this understanding of how interconnected everything is, both internally and externally. He believes it could lead to a more ethical, harmonious way of being.
So not just personal transformation, but societal transformation too.
Exactly. He even argues that it could hold the key to solving some of the biggest challenges facing humanity.
Okay, now that's a bold claim. How so?
Well, he uses the example of scientific research. He says, if scientists were more aware of this interconnectedness, if they approached their work from that understanding, they would be more mindful of the ethical implications of what they're doing.
So it's not just can we do this, but should we do this? And if so, how can it be done in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few, and that doesn't harm the planet in the process?
Precisely. It's about aligning our actions with a deeper understanding of the interconnected nature of reality.
It's a pretty radical shift in perspective. And speaking of radical shifts, what about this creation formula he mentions? What's that all about?
That one's a bit of a head-scratcher, even for me. It seems like he believes there might be an actual scientific formula for the very essence of creation itself.
Hold on. A formula for creation. Is he being literal here?
Hard to say for sure. It's definitely a concept that sparks curiosity, and without more context, it's tough to know if he's speaking literally or metaphorically.
It's definitely a lot to unpack. We've covered some seriously mind-bending concepts today, from mental space and elementals to empirical science and this creation formula. Oliver Whitwer, everybody. He's a unique blend of physics and spirituality, scientific curiosity and personal exploration. And whether you think he's onto something profound or he's gone completely off the deep end, you gotta admire his willingness to ask the big questions and challenge conventional thinking.
I agree. And who knows, maybe somewhere within his unconventional theories lies a seed of insight that could lead to a breakthrough we can't even imagine yet.
That's the beauty of deep dives like this. They push us to expand our thinking, to consider new possibilities. So if you're intrigued by Oliver Whitwer and want to explore his ideas further, you can check out his blog. We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes. And as always, keep those deep dive requests coming. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an open mind because you never know where those rabbit holes might lead.